Hey, I'm Gary Edelman.
And I'm Chris White.
And we are the American Battlefield Trust History in the Field team. We got Chris Mikowski behind the camera, and we are going to go crazy. We're starting in Atlanta right here, Chris.
Yeah, and then we're going to head our way all the way up into Tennessee, and we're going to stop at Chickamuaga.
So Chickamuaga, then I also know we're going to hit Chattanooga while we're there.
Yeah, and then we have to cross back into Georgia, where we're going to go into some other places. Well, maybe we got to get to Ringgold first, into that gap in Tennessee.
Oh my God, we're going to go to Dalton, Georgia.
Yeah, and then we're going to go to Rocky Face Ridge, Tunnel Hill.
I like Resaca as well, and there's some off the beaten path places we hope to hit while we're there.
Yeah, Resaca's just fun to say, if you ask me. And then we're going to make our way down towards Atlanta. We'll go to places like New Hope Church and Gilgal Church.
Good. Maybe even Pine Mountain if we can gain access there. I think you know a little bit about that. Maybe we'll even go to a different mountain near there, the king of them all, Kennesaw Mountain.
Yeah, and then we'll of course come to the Atlanta History Center, where we're standing in front of today.
Yeah, and we're going to go to another museum too if we can, because this place and that place are connected. That's the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History.
Yeah, and I can't think of anywhere else we might go on this trip, Gary.
Well, yeah, we're going to go around Atlanta. I hope we do show you that there are things to see in the Atlanta campaign, and we really appreciate all y'all who donated to the effort to send us to Atlanta, to Southern Tennessee, and we're going to bring as many videos to you as we can, and we'll bring a few special videos just for y'all who donated.
Yeah, we hope that you enjoy and you'll share this with your friends and with your family. We got all kinds of behind-the-scenes things going on. We have all kinds of guests, and we're going to be talking about the war in 1863 and 1864, and of course, we're going to be following in the footsteps of William T. Sherman's army as he presses south towards Atlanta.
But most people, including Chris, are really looking forward to walking in the footsteps of Braxton Bragg and Joseph Johnston and people like that. We are going to follow John Bell Hood as well. We've got all sorts of things to do, and we really hope you enjoy. These will release on YouTube in succession after this one, 2 or 3 a day, and they'll release periodically on Facebook as well. Like Chris said, make sure you share these with your friends. Sign up for our emails so that you can get to know how to become involved in these efforts. Anything to add, Chris?
Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting battlefield preservation.
Hey, welcome everybody. Man, we are in one of my favorite places. We are at the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History here in Kennesaw, Georgia. We're really excited to be here. There's lots of cool stuff here, but the real story here, to us at least, is the Great Locomotive Chase. And man, if you haven't been, you're in for a real treat. And right off the bat, I'm going to bring out our new friend, but our enthusiastic friend here, and not so short friend, Josh Trower. He's the Education Programs Coordinator here at the Southern Museum.
Hello, welcome to the Southern Museum. As he said, we talk a lot about trains here. We talk a lot about the Civil War. The Civil War was the first railroad war. So many of the major battles of the Civil War were fought around major railroad junctions, such as Manassas, Chattanooga, and Atlanta. Whoever controlled the railroads could control the war. So here we love to tell the story of the Great Locomotive Chase. If you'll follow me this way. The Great Locomotive Chase was a special mission that occurred on April 12, 1862. Union General Ormsby Mitchell, he was based out of Shelbyville, Tennessee, and he had a plan. He was hoping to attack Huntsville, Alabama, and then get to Chattanooga, that great railroad center. Now, a Union scout and spy named James J. Andrews, he came to him with an idea. He thought he could take that great Confederate supply line, the Western and Atlantic Railroad, off the board. So that's the railroad that was built in 1850 and stretches from Atlanta to Chattanooga. Of course, with that railroad, the Confederacy could just move supplies up to Chattanooga to stop any potential Union attack. Andrews, he wanted to sneak here with several Union volunteers, make their way down the railroad, hijack a train, then head north, and hopefully do as much damage to the track and burn bridges on their way north so the Confederacy could not use it to reinforce against Mitchell's attack.
So Josh, it's really cool to be in here, and I just love to see, we have all the raiders behind us. We have, what, 24 raiders that'll come down here? Yeah. They're volunteers, or voluntold as I like to call them, from the 2nd, 21st, and 33rd Ohio units. We're at Chickamuaga on this trip, so check out some of the pictures from the 2nd Ohio monument. It's one of the coolest monuments on the battlefield. It's actually an upside-down acorn, or as they say on Duck Dynasty, acorn. Then we have the 21st Ohio, which actually attacks Snodgrass Hill and is almost captured in mass. They're carrying Colt repeating rifles, and those are actually given out to all the color companies of the Confederates who capture them as prizes of war, even though the Confederates can't make the right ammunition for them. But here in outside of Atlanta, and we're going to show you a map here inside the museum and on this video, we have the Great Locomotive Chase. So the idea is to cut this Western Atlantic Railroad, not in 1864 during the Atlantic Campaign, but 1862. Yes. And there's 4 railroads running in and out of Atlanta at this point?
Yes, you have those 4 railroads, and if the Union is definitely wants to sever them to hopefully make the whole lower South open in the war.
So we're moving deep into the South early in the war, and is there anything in here you want to talk about in particular? I mean, we see the Medals of Honor. These are the first Medal of Honor recipients, or the earliest Medal of Honor recipients for the Andrews raid down into Georgia. Anything you want to add?
Well, the Andrews Raiders, they got civilian clothing when they were in Shelbyville, Tennessee. It was going to be a secret mission. They had to ditch their uniforms. They would make their way in small groups to Chattanooga and then board a Western Atlantic Railroad train south to Marietta. Now they number 24, but they'll lose 2 guys, Samuel Llewellyn and his partner Smith. Unfortunately, their cover story was, well, they were saying they're from Kentucky, and they were going to hang out. They wanted to meet some friends of theirs that were serving in Georgia, in a Georgia Confederate regiment. They wanted to serve in that regiment. Some folks didn't buy their story for these 2 men, and so they had to fall in with a Confederate artillery battery around Jasper, Tennessee. So now they're down to 22. They make their way down to Marietta, Georgia. They take the train. There's lots of rain and storms that week, so unfortunately they're actually running a day behind. They're hoping to coincide everything with Mitchell's attack, but they would have to delay it by a day. They're all able to get to Marietta by about April 11th, but 2 men, Hawkins and his companion, well, unfortunately, they forgot to tip their bellman, and so they would miss the raid as well. So for the raid, you only had 20 that actually made it.
It's always tip your bartenders and your servers, so always remember that.
Good advice.
So inside of here, we have some of the pictures of the gentlemen. We see some of them in uniforms. We have officers. We have enlisted men. So it's a great place to come down here, check out a little bit more of the story of the Andrews Raiders, and you can also head over to Chattanooga National Cemetery, where there's a memorial to them as soon as you drive inside of Chattanooga National Cemetery.
Let me add too that already on this trip, if you look at our video of Tunnel Hill, Georgia, if you look at our video in the Chattanooga National Cemetery, you'll see a little bit more about the Raiders and the raid. Of course, this is our main raid video, and I want to ask both Chris and Josh if you're allowed to say, you have a Raider that you're particularly drawn to. Is there a Raider? It's cliche. I like Andrews, but of course I do. Chris?
I like Andrews because he's from down the road. He's born in Weirton, West Virginia, which is 30 minutes from my hometown.
Josh?
Well, I am a train buff. I love trains, model trains and real trains. The guy I'm most attached to, where is this gentleman? Oops, sorry, no problem. William, here he is. William Knight. William Knight, he would take the engineer's position on the steam locomotive, the General, which is the locomotive the Raiders would hijack. They would board the morning train on April 12, 1862, out of Marietta, Georgia. It was led by the steam locomotive, the General, with a tender filled with water and wood. There were 3 boxcars and 3 passenger cars. Those boxcars would be perfect for concealing the Andrews Raiders for this mission. And then they headed north into history.
Cool. All right. So we're going to head into the gallery. So the Western Atlantic Railroad, it's a railroad that was funded by the state of Georgia. They started their funding in 1836, but didn't start building until 1839. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then one of the famous places they have is Tunnel Hill, which is a really cool site that we visited along the way. We're going to walk through Tunnel Hill, actually. But to start off the raid here, so we're outside of Marietta, Georgia. We're in Big Shanty. What's Big Shanty today? That's Kennesaw. And so whenever you get to this area, Josh, what do you, excuse me, you have a problem, right? If you're early days of railroads, you can't serve food on the train.
Yes, this is not the era of the ornate dining cars. That would come much later when they were able to better preserve food. So the trains have to make stops for breakfast and dinner, and they're going to stop at the Lacey Hotel in Big Shanty, Georgia. So at this point, the crew, including the conductor William Fuller, they all get off the train, and the passengers get off, and then the Andrews Raiders will spring into action. They will uncouple the boxcars from the passenger cars. So this Wilbur Kurtz painting right here, you see the general, the tender, those 3 boxcars, and the coaches. They'll make the separation right here. Most of the Raiders will get in one of the boxcars. William Knight and Wilson Brown will take the engineer and fireman's positions. Alf Wilson, he will handle the brakeman's positions on top of the boxcar. So you see the handbrake here, that's used for setting the brakes. The General itself doesn't have any brakes at this time. You want to slow it down to a stop, you have to actually put the locomotive in reverse. Another reason this is a great place to hijack the train is because this is an area that does not have a telegraph station, so they can keep the word from spreading. So they depart, they grab the train, much to the chagrin of the crew, who comes out to announcements that someone is running off with your train. So Fuller, he actually will run out with his firemen and a railroad supervisor named Anthony Murphy, and they'll actually chase on foot. The Raiders will make their way north about 2 miles, and there's a railroad section gang working at a place called Moon Station. So the section gang, these were track workers that would work on the rails and make sure they remained aligned. That section gang is led by a man named Jackson Bond. And there, he actually loans some track tools to the Raiders. They make a quick stop. Andrew's cover story is that they're moving valuable ammunition to PGT Beauregard. He buys a story. Bond buys a story, but he's a little confused. He doesn't know anybody in the Capitol Locomotive. The train's running a little early, and he's definitely wondering why there are no passenger cars on the train. Train heads down up the track a little more. Knight checks the locomotive. It looks good. Checks the water supply. Okay, they're fine. They're ready. Some of the Raiders are a little bored. They're trying to take some cross ties and put it on the track, maybe creating an obstruction. So Fuller and his railroaders, they will end up getting to Moon Station, and they will borrow a push cart from the section gang that's working there. So not like the hand cars with the pump action that you might have seen in some Looney Tunes cartoons. This is actually more like a Venice gondola. So there's a cart, there's a pole, and they're pushing their way down the track to chase the Andrews Raiders. And also, the Andrews Raiders at Moon Station, Sergeant Scott has climbed up the telegraph pole and snipped the line, hopefully to keep the alarm from spreading.
This is really an impressive plan, by the way. And this thing, well, we don't want to spoil the end. We don't want to say what happens here. I'm sure you don't know, but really an impressive plan and well thought out and pretty well executed by a lot of the Raiders. And I just love this idea of these guys chasing on foot. And then by this, it's a great story.
Chris, I want to bring you just here for a second to show the map. So William Fuller is on the train. He's the Confederate conductor, essentially. He has to get his train back, or he wants his train back. This is now, I think, a pride thing, if you ask me. Josh might agree or not disagree, but he wants to get his train back. Starts off on foot, starts on that push car. But you can see here's Atlanta down here at the bottom part of the map. The Western and Atlantic Railroad runs, and it's not a straight line railroad. You can see it has to zigzag. There's a lot of places you have to go up and over. Here's Yona. Yona means bear. Allatoona is over in this area, across the Etowah, up to Kingston, up to Adairsville, up to Resaca, Tilton, Dalton, Tunnel Hill, Ringgold, all places, or many places we've gone to already on our swing here. But this is a 138-mile railroad running between Atlanta and Chattanooga, Tennessee. Both not the cities you think of today. Both very much growing cities. So we've made it up the road, railroad a little ways, Josh.
Yep. We have gone past Moon Station, and our next stop will actually be Etowah. So that is in industrial territory just north of Ackworth. They pass the Cooper Iron Works branch line. That's right here, where there's a steam locomotive called the Yona. There are the Andrews Raiders with the 3 boxcars heading north. Now, William Knight in the Capitol Locomotive, he turns to Andrews and says, we should destroy that locomotive, and he thinks that they should burn the bridge over the Etowah River too. Andrews says, no, we're good. We're staying on the schedule so not to attract attention. Plus, he didn't want to risk a potential shootout with the men gathered on the platform. Now the train's conductor, William Fuller, he makes his way here, and he gets off that hand cart and then commandeers the Yonah. So then they back the Yonah out, and they chase after them. So now the Great Locomotive Chase is on.
So whenever they are coming up the railroad, it is important to stay on schedule because this is a one-track railroad, correct?
Yes. This is the era of what was called train order and timetable operation. Everything is governed strictly by the timetable. If you're early or if you're late, that's going to attract attention. Plus, then you need special train orders to govern operation. They're not really going to have the ability to do that. They don't want to make as much. They want to make as little contact as possible. And I'm glad you brought that up because when you get to Kingston, Georgia, they run into a little bit of a traffic jam of freight trains. There's a lot of southbound traffic because Mitchell's attack is occurring in Alabama. So the Confederacy is trying to move supplies out of the way of that Union attack. So there are what they call extra trains running on the railroad. There are extra southbound freight trains. Because of this, the Raiders have to sit here for an hour and 5 minutes while William Fuller and his railroaders are gaining on them. So they sit there, and finally they're able to head north. Fuller gets there, and he actually, the issue with Fuller is he can't get the Yonah past here. But there is a steam locomotive called the W.R. Smith that is sitting there with a passenger car. He's been running a train on the branch line to Rome, Georgia. He gets on, and several Confederate militiamen will get on the passenger car. The train's fireman, Jefferson Kane, he's had enough. He decides he's going to fall out. Then they head north in pursuit of the Raiders. Now the Raiders, north of town, they're able to take out a piece of rail using some of those track tools they'd taken from Jackson Bond's section gang. They take that rail out, and the W.R. Smith is not able to pursue. And because of that, Fuller is now back to running along the track. Yes, Fuller and Murphy trying to pursue the Raiders.
So, Josh, let me ask you, they have to dress in civilian clothes. Did they have any sort of weapons with them? And I know that they only had like one crowbar when they showed up,
yes.
And that was about it.
They had some sidearms and really did not have the materials they needed to do lasting damage to the railroad. Mostly, they're not doing damage this day, they're just on the run. It's creating a huge nuisance to the Confederate forces in the area. As they get north of Kingston, the Andrews Raiders will actually meet a southbound freight train, and it's led by a locomotive called the Texas. During their meet, they actually had, at the siding, they have a brief conversation. The Texas talks about the Union attacks that's come. They say there are a lot of extra trains running on the railroad, and by railroad rule, they should have a flagman walking in front of the general several paces to flag any southbound traffic to come to a stop. There's a train behind us. Andrew says he's going to do that. Really, he doesn't. They don't have time for that. They roll north, and he just tells Knight, just blow the whistle as much as possible. We have to continue the mission. Fuller, he will eventually come across the Texas, and he says, my train's been stolen. And at first he thinks his train's actually been stolen by Confederate deserters from Camp McDonald, which was across from the tracks in Big Shanty. Well, he realizes now that these guys are pretty sophisticated, so it must be Union spies. So that's why more people are willing to join Fuller's chase after the locomotive. The Texas's engineer, Pete Bracken, he says, okay, Fuller gets on. They chase after him backwards. They actually take their whole train with them, but then he'll drop his train off in a siding. So then it's the Texas pushing backwards, tender first, chasing the Raiders. And eventually the Raiders will hear the Texas behind them, and they know they are in a race for their lives now.
So what are the speeds are we looking at? Because you see some of the train coming from Atlanta up to Chattanooga. I mean, those are some impressive, basically small mountains going up in that way. What speeds are we looking at?
Typical operational speeds in the Civil War was about 15 to 20 miles an hour. I mean, this was the light iron rail at the time, not the heavy steel rail of today that can support those big freight trains. But they potentially got up to speeds of around 50 to 60 miles an hour during the Great Locomotive Chase. So they were really cooking.
So, in theory, they could get a train up to 88 miles an hour, if you get the fire hot enough.
Well, I mean, you need a flux capacitor, though.
Oh, yeah. You also need these special fire bricks.
Indeed.
So, if you're a Back to the Future 3 fan, there you go.
Yes, I understand that reference. Here's a picture of the Texas pushing backwards, and you can see they picked up two boxcars. That's because the Raiders tried to uncouple their boxcars and hopefully put an obstruction in front of the pursuing Texas. Texas just couples up to them and will drop them off in a siding. They make their way north through Tunnel Hill, and there's the painting right there. You see the Texas pushing backwards. They now dropped those boxcars in the siding, chasing after them. The general is running out of steam. They're running out of water and running out of wood, and so they go through the tunnel, make it to near Ringgold, Georgia, and finally the Raiders have to abandon the locomotive and scatter. Word is finally spread about the hijacking of the train because the Texas was able to pick up a telegraph operator named Henderson who was working at the Dalton Telegraph Station, at the train station. Henderson knew something was wrong. He's wondering why he's not getting any messages from the south. So he was walking south. Texas picks him up and they tell him what happened. The Texas will end up dropping Henderson off at the Dalton station, and he spreads the alarm. He's able to get most of a message to General Ledbetter to the north, who's going to sever the railroad to the north in order to box the Raiders in. Sergeant Scott, he tries to snap the telegraph line again north of Dalton. But just as he snaps the wire, most of that message got through. And so the Raiders, they are now hemmed in. So they all scatter. They leave the locomotive, and they are all captured.
Let me just say that I know this story, and I'm getting all excited about it as well. So I really appreciate your helping us here today, Josh. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're at the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History, and here we are standing in front of what must be a duplicate or a model of the general, right?
Oh, this is the actual locomotive, built in 1855 by the Rogers Locomotive Works in Paterson, New Jersey. They brought it down on a ship and then moved it up by rail to the Western and Atlantic Railroad. But we get that question a lot. That is no problem. Now, of course, it's had lots of parts swapped out over the years, boiler, running gear, but this is the engine that the Andrews Raiders would hijack on that fateful morning of April 12, 1862. And the Texas, the locomotive that chased after them, is a similar type of locomotive. It is a 440 American-style locomotive, a popular engine of the 19th century. So by 440, I mean it has 4 small pilot wheels leading the locomotive, 4 big driving wheels, no extra small wheels under the firebox. The fireboxes were smaller enough then, you need those extra small wheels in the back. A wood-fired locomotive.
Yeah, if you ever play with Lionel Trains, you'll know what he's talking about and how all of it interworks. So, Josh, let's finish up this part of the story. So they end up around mile marker 116,
Yes.
whenever it ends, and the Raiders then start just running for their lives.
Yes, they all end up getting wrapped up and captured, including the 2 that were left behind in Marietta, as people start to realize after the news spreads, so those are those 2 strangers that were hanging out in Marietta this day. So they're captured, they're all put in jail in Chattanooga. Then they'll be moved down to Fulton County Jail in Atlanta, and 8 of the Raiders are executed, including Andrews. 8 would escape, make their way back to Union lines, and then 6 more, they would later be exchanged and paroled in prisoner exchanges.
Yeah, the Provost Marshal, George Washington Lee of Atlanta, is actually questioned by higher-ups in Richmond of why don't you execute these other 6 guys quicker? Why don't you just execute them? But they're eventually, as Josh said, exchanged. So, William Fuller, the guy who was leading the chase, what happens to him?
Oh, he's a great hero of the raid, and he will actually serve in the Confederate Army later, and of course he's just a great honored honored conductor. Honored conductors, you always have trains on the mind.
He's sort of a locomotive.
Yes, he's sort of a locomotive and honored conductor with the railroad, and he will actually attend reunions of the Raiders and the Chasers after the Civil War. They will actually reunite with the general, because after the Civil War, they realized this is historically significant. It escaped damage during the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain, during the Atlanta campaign. They preserved it after the war, and then they actually were taken on tours to special encampments, the Grand Army of the Republic activities, the Chicago World's Fair, the New York World's Fair. Last time it was under steam was in the 1960s for the centennial of the Civil War. The Louisville and Nashville Railroad, a successor to the Western and Atlantic Railroad, brought it out into service. It's been at the museum here since 1972.
Awesome. So let's talk about the locomotive, because we have some real people who love to talk about the locomotives. So as we're looking at it, up front we have the often called cattle catcher.
Yes, you have the pilot. Yep.
And then we have up top, the light that was on it would have been a oil lamp, or would have been?
Yeah, it would have been a more rudimentary lamp than the electric lamp you see right here. You also have the big smokestack that has a spark arrestor inside, and those are great to catch all those wood cinders that are blowing around, so you don't set any forest fires as you're running the locomotive.
Yeah, because remember, this would create just a ton of smoke coming out of one of these. Let's take a walk down, Josh, and
Sure.
take a closer look here. So it's steam powered. So
Yes.
we have to get a fire going, and this is the tender we talk about a lot, correct?
Yes, here you have your firebox, here's your tender. You have your wood in your tender and your water in your tender. The fireman puts the wood in the firebox. The water from the tender will flow into the boiler. You're heating up that fire, which will heat up the water and turn into steam. The steam will then rise to the steam dome right here. And if you look up, you can see this linkage between the steam dome that connects to the engineer's throttle. So he's pulling on that with the Johnson bar. He's actually opening up the valve that brings steam down into these cylinders, which will move a piston back and forth, which is connected to the drive rods, and that gives you your locomotion. Now the engine, after the Civil War, was converted to coal firing, because coal burns a lot better than wood, and now, when they restored it in the 60s, it's an oil-fired locomotive. So the wood is just for show. There's an oil bunker inside the tender, and there's an atomizer, so the fireman turns a valve, sprays the oil into the firebox, so he doesn't have to shovel anything anymore, and it's kind of hard to shovel oil. You get oil over inside of the cab, and then you can go off down the tracks.
That's awesome. And it looks like they have some modern seats up inside of it. And
Yes, there are a lot of appliances that weren't on the locomotive during the Civil War, such as, you can see the brake rigging right here. That wasn't there. Yep.
Yeah, so this is really cool. Something that's cool on the other side. Let's turn around first. I want to show the great locomotive chase here, because I think a lot of people as kids will know Buster Keaton as well as Fess Parker doing the great locomotive chase. And this is an actual coat from?
Yes, that's from the 1956 movie, The Great Locomotive Chase, worn by Fess Parker. So the locomotive is a bit of a pop cultural icon. So it was represented, the actual locomotive wasn't in the movies, but it was represented in the movies Great Locomotive Chase and The General. And it's also been represented in models over the years. In the late 1950s, Lionel made their model of The General, which they have remade since then.
And of course, we have it in French over here, so you can go see the Les Frères Prusson. And we also have up here Fess Parker. He's not just Davy Crockett. So let's head down this way. And you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We want to really thank you for watching this video. If you haven't checked out our Tunnel Hill video, you can see the actual Tunnel Hill, even though we've walked through the shortest tunnel hill on Earth just now to get through here. But you can see over here, and Josh, I want to point out, I think these are absolutely cool. Can you point out exactly what these are for our audience?
These are milepost markers, and you'll see them along the railroad then and today. The C is representing your distance from Chattanooga, so 103 miles. So that they would have passed these flying by on the Great Locomotive Chase.
And on the other side, you have the A for Atlanta, so that you know if you're heading towards Atlanta or heading towards Chattanooga.
35 miles to Atlanta, yes.
Yeah, this is awesome. Gary?
Yeah, I have a clarification here, and then I have one last question as well, because I think during this we're probably showing you what B-roll we can to show you a little bit more inside and around and above the actual locomotive here, which is really cool. But I mean, when was the Medal of Honor authorized, and how long after that were these first ones awarded? Am I wrong that these aren't only awarded, but they're the very first ones ever awarded in American history? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so is this, so isn't it authorized just in a few months before this, and then they go ahead and award them to some of these raiders? So this was seen as significant at that time. Mm-hmm. And let me hit you with my other question then too. We've only checked out a few rooms of this museum, but there are other huge rooms. What else do you do here?
Oh yes, we have a lot about the role of the railroads in the Civil War, the United States Military Railroad. We also have a Mercy boxcar here, which is a French boxcar loaned, given to America as a thank you for after World War II. We just love to talk about the role of the railroads in the Civil War. And please, you can come and see us any Tuesday through Saturday from 9:30 to 5 o'clock.
Well done. I just can't stress enough, man. We run into a lot of people along our travels, but I think you are the most enthusiastic one that we've run into.
Thank you,
Josh,
thank you.
It's been great to make a new good acquaintance and friend. I hope we can help the museum. I hope you'll check out the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History. Chris White, anything else to add?
This is an awesome place. If you ever get a chance, come down, check it out. And we do offer our field trip fund for you teachers, and this is one place that qualifies to get kids down to engage with their history.
Good, good. Josh Chowers, thanks so much for having
Thanks
us.
a lot
Thanks
for
to
coming,
everybody
guys. It's no problem.
here at the museum. Chris Mikowski, not only our cameraman, but our lighting man at the same time. Thanks so much, Chris White. And to all you for watching, we hope you enjoy and follow us along as we take our trip through the Atlanta campaign. This is one of the first videos that you're going to be seeing from, I believe at least, from this series. And we are going to go all the way down to Atlanta if it works out. So thank you so much for watching. Thanks for having us. And thank you for supporting Battlefield Preservation and Education.